Elena Whitmore grew up in a rich but cold house where money was never the problem, but love was. Her father, Richard Whitmore, was a powerful businessman, and her mother, Diane Whitmore, always followed his lead. From the beginning, they treated Elena like she didn't matter. Her younger brother, Nolan, was the favorite. He was praised for everything, while Elena was ignored or criticized, no matter what she did. They often called her useless, as if she had no value in the Whitmore family. Elena tried hard to prove herself. She studied well, helped at home, and stayed quiet most of the time, hoping one day they would notice her effort. But nothing changed. In her parents' eyes, she was never enough. One evening, the Whitmore family held a formal dinner at their large mansion. Important guests from the business world were invited. The table was full of expensive food, polite smiles, and hidden tension. Elena sat quietly, trying to avoid attention. But Richard chose that moment to embarrass her. In front of everyone, he questioned her abilities and made it clear she had no place in the family business. Diane stayed silent, not defending her daughter even once. Nolan smirked, enjoying the moment, as if Elena's pain meant nothing to him. The guests watched in awkward silence, but no one spoke up. Elena felt her face burn with shame, but she didn't cry. She simply lowered her eyes, hiding the pain inside. That night, something inside her changed. It was no longer just sadness. It was the beginning of something deeper, determination. While her family saw her as useless, Elena started to question everything. Why was she always pushed aside? Why was she treated differently from Nolan? She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to take a turn that would reveal a truth far bigger than the insults she had lived with all her life. Nolan was always treated like he was born for success. Every step he took was guided by their father, Richard Whitmore. He had private tutors, business mentors, and constant training in finance and leadership. Richard would take him into closed meetings, where important decisions about the family's investment empire were discussed behind locked doors. Elena was never invited into those rooms. Even when she stood nearby, conversations would suddenly stop. Files were quickly closed. Laptops were turned away from her sight. It was as if she was invisible in the most important parts of her own family's life. At first, she tried not to care. But slowly, she started noticing small things that didn't match what she was told. Nolan would leave the house at strange hours, always in expensive suits, even when he claimed he was just learning. Richard would receive phone calls late at night and leave without explanation. Diane would act nervous whenever certain names were mentioned. Elena began paying attention without telling anyone. She watched how staff moved around the house, how documents were delivered in sealed folders marked confidential, and how those folders never reached her room or her hands. She realized she was being kept outside of something important on purpose. One afternoon, she accidentally walked past a study room door that was slightly open. Inside, she saw Nolan sitting with two senior executives, discussing numbers that sounded too large for ordinary business. When he noticed her, the door was shut immediately. That moment stayed with her. It wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It felt structured, planned. From that day, Elena started quietly tracking patterns. She wrote down dates, times, and small details she could remember. The more she observed, the clearer it became that the Whitmore family empire was not just wealthy, it was deeply layered, with parts of it hidden even from people inside the house. And for the first time, Elena felt like her exclusion wasn't random. It was deliberate. She couldn't ignore what she had seen earlier, so when the house fell into its usual late-night silence, she went back toward the study area again. This time, she moved slower, watching every corner, making sure no staff or security guard was nearby. The mansion felt different at night, like it was hiding things even the walls were aware of. Behind the main study, she found a hidden panel she had not noticed before. It blended perfectly with the wood design, but a thin gap gave it away. She pressed lightly, and it opened with a soft click. Inside was a narrow passage leading to a storage space that felt older than the rest of the house. The air inside was dry, and the lighting was weak, but rows of locked cabinets lined the walls. Some had digital security, others had old mechanical locks. It felt like a place meant for things no one was supposed to find. She tried the first cabinet and found it unlocked. Inside were thick folders, stacked neatly, each one marked with coded labels instead of normal names. She pulled one out and opened it carefully. The contents were not normal business records. These were detailed financial structures spread across different countries, with layers of ownership and trust systems. The numbers were massive, but what caught her attention was the repetition of certain approval chains tied to family-linked entities. As she went deeper into the files, she noticed something strange. Entire sections looked edited, as if original pages had been removed and replaced. In one folder, she saw multiple versions of the same structure, each with different assignments. Then her eyes stopped on something that made her freeze. In several earlier versions, she was listed as the main controller for key financial holdings. Not in a small role, but in a central position tied to long-term inheritance planning. But in the newer versions, her name had been pushed out completely, replaced by other assignments that redirected control elsewhere. Her hands went cold as she compared the documents side by side. The changes were not accidental. They were carefully rewritten, line by line, as if someone had deliberately reshaped the future of the entire family structure. She closed the folder slowly, realizing this place was not just hiding wealth. It was hiding decisions that had already been made about her life before she ever had a say in it. The next morning, Elena could not focus on anything. Every document she had seen kept replaying in her mind. She needed answers from someone who had been inside the system before everything changed. After searching quietly through old contacts and records she had found in the study files, she came across a name that appeared several times in legal documents: Harold Bexley. He was listed as a retired legal advisor who once handled major structuring work for the Whitmore estate. It took her 2 days to find where he was living now. When she finally stood outside his small, quiet home on the edge of the city, it felt nothing like the world she had grown up in. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked. The door opened slowly. An old man with tired eyes looked at her carefully, as if he already knew why she was there but didn't want to say it. When she told him her name, his expression changed slightly. Not surprise. More like regret. Inside, the house was simple. Books, old files, and faded certificates filled the shelves. He did not offer much comfort, only a chair and silence before speaking. At first, he avoided her questions. He kept saying things like, "Some matters are better left in the past." But Elena did not move. She showed him copies of what she had found, the financial structures, the changes, the missing links. That is when his silence broke. He leaned back slowly, as if the weight of years had finally caught up to him. Then he admitted that he had been part of the legal team that originally structured the Whitmore estate planning. His voice was low, careful, like every word carried risk. What he said next changed everything she thought she understood. Her removal from inheritance was not something that happened naturally or through normal family decisions. It had been arranged through internal pressure, pushed forward after a serious conflict within the family's closest circle. He did not name every detail, but he made it clear that trust had been broken from inside the system. Elena listened without interrupting, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The idea that she had been slowly erased on purpose felt heavier than anything she had discovered before. Before she left, Harold finally looked at her directly and said something she would not forget. The way she had been treated, the way she had been labeled and pushed aside, was not an accident of family emotion. It had been designed to make sure she never stepped into the position that was once meant for her. It happened before she expected it. She was still trying to connect the pieces of everything she had learned when the atmosphere inside the house shifted. Servants moved differently that morning, avoiding eye contact. Security guards who usually ignored her presence suddenly stood closer to the doors. By afternoon, Richard Whitmore called her into the main hall. He was not alone. Diane stood near the staircase, silent as always, holding herself like she didn't want to be part of what was coming. Nolan was there too, calm and distant, watching like it had nothing to do with him. Richard did not waste time. He spoke in a sharp, controlled voice, saying her actions had crossed a line. He mentioned the restricted areas, the documents, and the questions she had been asking. It was clear he already knew everything. Elena tried to explain, but he raised his hand, cutting her off. There was no discussion, no listening, just a decision already made. She was told to leave the estate immediately. For a moment, she stood still, thinking she had misheard him. But the guards at the door stepped forward, confirming it was real. Her room was already being packed, her access to everything blocked. Even her personal items were being removed without her approval. Diane did not speak a single word. Not when Elena looked at her. Not when she asked why. She just turned her face away, as if silence could erase responsibility. Nolan finally spoke, but his tone was colder than anything she had heard before. He said she was always too different, too disconnected from what the family stood for. His words were careful, chosen to sound reasonable, but they carried something deeper. Like he had already accepted her removal long ago. There was no argument left to fight. Elena was given a small account transfer, enough to leave but not enough to return. No explanation beyond what had already been said. No promise of future contact. Just an ending pushed onto her without warning. As she walked through the long hallway for the last time, she noticed how everything felt unchanged without her. The paintings, the marble floors, the quiet luxury. None of it cared that she was leaving. When she stepped outside the gates, she did not look back immediately. But when she finally did, she realized something that settled heavily in her chest. This was not a sudden rejection. It was something that had been prepared long before she ever tried to understand why she never belonged. Life outside the Whitmore estate was nothing like what Elena was used to. She moved quietly, using a different name for basic things, staying away from anything that could link her back to her old world. The small apartment she lived in felt empty, but what hurt more was the silence that followed her everywhere. No calls. No messages. Just distance that felt too clean, like it had been planned. She took small jobs just to survive, trying not to think about the past. But even in ordinary places, she noticed patterns now. Money systems, banking terms, hidden structures, things she never paid attention to before kept coming back to her mind. One evening, after finishing a short shift at a document center, she found an envelope waiting at the reception desk. No sender name. No company logo. Just her new name written neatly on the front. Inside was a single card with a coded number and a message telling her to meet someone if she wanted answers about inactive financial ties connected to her identity. She almost ignored it. But something about the phrasing made her pause. The meeting location was a quiet office building she had never seen before. On the 10th floor, she was led into a glass-walled room where a woman waited. Calm posture, sharp eyes, simple suit. She introduced herself as Vivian Hale, a forensic accountant who worked independently on high-level financial tracing. Vivian did not waste time with greetings. She immediately spoke about a dormant offshore structure tied to Elena's legal identity. According to her, this account had been inactive for years, but it was never closed. It was locked, waiting for proper authorization. Elena listened carefully, trying to stay calm, but the number Vivian mentioned made her lose focus for a moment. It was not small. It was tens of millions, stored across multiple linked structures. At first, Elena thought it might be a mistake or fraud. But Vivian showed her coded records, matching identifiers, and verification trails that connected directly to her name. That was the first time Elena started to question her exile in a different way. It was not just about being pushed out of a family. It felt like she had been disconnected from something much larger. Over the next days, Vivian guided her through strict verification steps. Identity confirmation, legal tracing, financial cross-checks across multiple regions. It was slow and controlled, as if every layer had been designed to prevent mistakes or interference. Then one morning, the final confirmation arrived. The dormant structure was not only real, it was fully assigned to her. The total value reached $89 million. When the activation process was completed, the transfer moved quietly through secure channels. There was no public announcement, no warning. But within hours, systems connected to the Whitmore network registered unusual activity linked to Elena's restored financial status. Somewhere inside the empire she had left behind, people noticed she was no longer invisible. The verification process took longer than Elena expected. Every step felt like passing through locked doors inside locked doors. Vivian handled most of the communication, speaking in calm, precise sentences while Elena sat through hours of document checks, identity confirmations, and legal cross-references across different financial systems. Some days, she felt like the system itself was testing her patience more than her identity. Every detail had to match perfectly: old records, signature patterns, historical account links. Even small mismatches were flagged and reviewed again. Vivian never showed frustration. She only said that structures like this were built to stay hidden until the right person returned. One afternoon, they moved into a higher-level validation stage. Elena was taken into a secure room where biometric scans, legal authentication, and encrypted confirmations were completed one after another. It felt less like paperwork and more like unlocking something that had been sealed away for a long time. During one of the pauses, Elena asked quietly if people usually lose access to something like this so completely. Vivian did not answer directly. She only said that sometimes control is removed before a person even understands they had it. That answer stayed with Elena. After days of continuous processing, the final review was scheduled. The room was silent except for the soft sound of systems running in the background. Vivian sat across from her, watching the final data streams load on the screen. Then it happened. A confirmation appeared across multiple secured systems at once. The dormant offshore structure tied to Elena's identity was fully verified. Ownership, legality, and access rights were all confirmed without dispute. The value displayed was not just large. It was structured, layered, and active across several financial regions. The final total settled at $89 million. For a moment, Elena did not react. It felt unreal, like seeing a number that belonged to someone else's life. But Vivian simply nodded and began the activation sequence. Once the transfer process was initiated, the system began releasing the funds through secure channels. It was silent, but extremely controlled. No public record, no announcement, only internal financial networks updating in real time. Within hours, subtle alerts began appearing in connected systems tied to the Whitmore empire. Not direct messages, not warnings, but shifts in financial tracking that could not be ignored. Some accounts flagged changes in linked structures. Certain internal monitoring systems registered unusual activity connected to Elena's restored identity. Far away from that secure room, inside offices filled with people who once considered her irrelevant, something had changed without noise. Elena did not see their reactions, but she understood one thing clearly. The version of her that they had pushed out no longer existed in silence. The first sign of trouble inside the Whitmore empire was not loud. It started with small alerts in the financial monitoring systems. At first, Richard ignored them, thinking it was a technical delay. But within hours, more reports came in. Accounts linked to long-term structures were showing unexpected activity tied to Elena's restored identity. Richard's calm disappeared quickly. He called emergency meetings with his legal team and financial advisors. Papers were pulled out, calls were made, and every department tried to trace how control had shifted without their knowledge. Nolan stood beside him, watching the screens, his face tightening as more confirmations appeared. It was not just money moving. It was authority changing. Richard ordered immediate legal pressure. His lawyers began preparing documents to challenge the activation, looking for any technical weakness they could use. They tried to argue that the transfer should not have been allowed, that there were missing approvals, that the structure had been improperly accessed. At the same time, quiet pressure was applied through private channels. Messages were sent through intermediaries, offering settlement terms that sounded polite on paper but carried clear demands underneath. The goal was simple: make Elena step back before the situation spread further. Nolan was not patient. He pushed for faster action, suggesting more direct methods to shut everything down. His confidence, once steady, now felt unstable. Every update from the financial team made him more restless. Then Diane appeared in the background of the situation again. For years, she had stayed silent, but now she tried to reach Elena directly. The messages were soft at first. Words about family, misunderstanding, and wanting to fix things. Then the tone shifted, becoming more emotional, almost desperate. She asked to meet, to talk privately, to resolve everything away from legal conflict. Elena read every message without responding. She recognized the pattern immediately. The same family that had pushed her out now wanted access again, not because they cared, but because control was slipping. She did not agree to any meeting. As pressure increased, so did the tension inside the Whitmore household. Meetings between Richard and his advisors grew longer and more chaotic. Arguments broke out behind closed doors. Reports contradicted each other. No one seemed fully in control anymore. Nolan began questioning decisions that he once supported without hesitation. Diane's attempts to soften the situation only created more distance. Elena stayed out of sight, but her position was no longer fragile. Every attempt to push her back only made it clearer that the structure they once controlled around her was breaking piece by piece. Elena did not react to the pressure or the messages anymore. Instead, she started working quietly with Vivian and a new team of specialists Vivian introduced to her. They were not loud or emotional people. They worked with documents, records, and financial systems, going through every layer of the Whitmore empire piece by piece. For the first time, Elena was not guessing. She was seeing everything clearly. The team began by tracing old trust structures. These were complex systems built over years, with multiple layers of ownership and hidden transfers. At first, everything looked legal on the surface. But when they dug deeper, patterns started to appear. Certain approvals kept pointing to the same time periods when Elena's access had been removed. Some documents had overlapping signatures that did not match official authorization timelines. Others showed last-minute edits that changed beneficiary roles without proper legal consistency. Elena watched everything carefully, asking questions when needed, but mostly staying silent. She was not just learning what had happened to her. She was learning how it had been done. Then came the first major discovery. A series of internal restructuring documents showed that her removal from inheritance was not just a family decision. It had been processed through formal systems, but under manipulated conditions. Certain approvals had been pushed through using authority structures that were never meant to override her original position. Richard's name appeared across several key authorization points. But the deeper shock came when they found Nolan's involvement. In multiple internal approvals, his digital signature was present on documents that confirmed changes to asset distribution and trust control. At first glance, it looked like routine confirmation. But the timestamps and supporting records showed something else. Some approvals were signed without proper review, and in a few cases, the supporting documents had been altered after his signature was placed. The legal team did not need to exaggerate anything. The records spoke for themselves. As the findings were organized, Vivian prepared controlled reports and sent them through secure channels. These were not public statements yet, but they were enough to trigger attention in financial and legal networks connected to the Whitmore empire. Slowly, consequences began to spread. Advisors who once worked closely with Richard started distancing themselves. Partners requested clarifications. Internal meetings became defensive instead of strategic. Confidence in the Whitmore structure began to weaken as inconsistencies became harder to explain. Nolan tried to push back, but every new attempt only created more questions. Richard, who once controlled situations with ease, now spent most of his time reacting instead of leading. Elena did not celebrate. She simply continued reviewing the evidence as it came in. Each file confirmed the same truth in different ways. What had been done to her was not random or emotional. It had been structured, recorded, and executed through systems meant to appear untouchable. And now those same systems were starting to expose themselves. The final meeting did not take place in the Whitmore mansion. It happened inside a private legal chamber arranged by Elena's team. The room was plain, with long glass tables and recording systems already active. Everything said there would be stored, reviewed, and verified. Richard arrived first, dressed as if nothing had changed. But his eyes gave him away. He looked around the room like he was still trying to understand how control had shifted so far outside his reach. Nolan followed behind him, quieter than usual, his confidence no longer steady. Diane came last, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Elena entered without hesitation. There was no family warmth in the room. Only documents, screens, and legal representatives sitting on both sides. Vivian stood near Elena, calm and ready. Richard started speaking first. He tried to regain authority through tone. He questioned the process, the legality of the financial activation, and the investigation reports. He tried to make it sound like everything could still be challenged, like the situation was still flexible. But every point he raised was already covered. Elena's team placed the evidence on the central screen. Layer after layer of financial records appeared. Trust structures, signature trails, approval logs, and internal communications were displayed in sequence. Nothing was emotional. Everything was documented. Richard's voice slowed as he realized there was no gap left to attack. Every structure he built around control had already been mapped and explained. He tried one last move. He spoke directly to Elena, lowering his voice, attempting to bring her back into a family role instead of a legal position. He mentioned history, responsibility, and reputation, trying to shift the focus away from evidence. Elena did not react to the emotional angle. She simply waited until he finished. Then she responded calmly, through her legal representative, confirming that all claims had already been reviewed and supported by verified records. There was no negotiation left. Nolan sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. For the first time, he did not argue. He was looking at everything that had been done in his name, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that his position had never been as solid as he believed. Diane finally spoke, but her words were soft and uncertain. No one answered her. The meeting ended without argument or drama. There was no need for it anymore. Elena stood up first. She did not look at them for long. She did not need to. As she walked out of the chamber, the weight she had carried for years felt different now. Not gone, but no longer controlling her direction. Behind her, the family she once belonged to remained seated among the records of what they had built and what they had lost. And for the first time, Elena was not the one being defined by them. She was the one who had already rewritten everything.